fell up. Some of you got the document first time round, some of you didn't. I think you've all got a copy now. If not, there are hard copies available. This is the discussion document on FlexiSuper, which was part of the United Future National Confidence and Supply Agreement. And essentially what it does is put forward what I think is a different approach to the whole superannuation debate. For too long it's been a debate that's really polarised around the age of entitlement, 67 versus 65, and neither position is going anywhere. What this actually says is that rather than the government impose a mandatory age for eligibility, you give people choice, and essentially, as you'll see from the document, if you were to opt to take your superannuation at the age of 60, you'd take it at a discounted rate. If you were choosing to defer to maybe the age of 70, you would get an enhanced rate of superannuation. There are considerable advantages in this for a number of groups in the population, particularly those people who are physically exhausted by the age of 60 because of the nature of the work that they've been doing. Maori, Pacifica, who don't have, normally speaking, the same lifespans after retirement as others. And also for people who are at the other end, who are spending longer in the workforce, who may wish to defer the uptake of their superannuation for a longer period. What this does is effectively put the choice in their hands as to when they choose to retire. For a number, of course, in years to come, those who might be choosing to take the earlier age, that will be supplemented by the knowledge that they will have a KiwiSaver payout due at the age of 65. KiwiSaver is not part of this package, but it's part of the wider landscape. So in essence, under FlexiSuper, what would happen is that the core age of entitlement would remain 65. People who chose to take their superannuation at 65 would take it at exactly the same rate and conditions as they do today. Those who chose to go earlier would be making a gamble, I guess, that their time on superannuation might be as long as others, and they would take the advantage of those earlier years. Those who chose to defer would be taking a gamble the other way, that they're going to get around to being there to pick it up. In terms of cost, it's relatively neutral, but what it does do is actually shift the debate from the rather sterile one about age and puts it very much back into the choice of people in terms of their own lifestyle aspirations. The document itself sets out various pros and cons. They have been prepared, the document was prepared by the Treasury. The next step from here is that it will be available for public consultation until the 11th of October. After that time there will be obviously the collation and the assessment of the submissions, and then the government will receive a report and will determine later in the year, shortly thereafter, what action it chooses to take on these proposals. This is, as I said at the beginning, part of the confidence and supply agreement, but it's a popular policy in terms of a number of the informal feedback items, informal feedback that we've received, also some polling data that's been in the public arena, and I think it does shift the game somewhat in terms of people's expectations about superannuation.
How likely is it that the government will pick this up?
Well, I think the government will be assessing, and I can't speak for them obviously at this point, but I think the government will be assessing what the likely popularity is. And obviously, if you look at some of the polls that have been published, this is a very popular policy. It gives people some choices, and I think the government might well be disposed, if there's sufficiently strong support, to look at this in the context of its wider approach to superannuation, but it's too early to be specific at this point.
Have they given you any indication of which way they're leaning?
I think that it's fair to say that as the debate has unfolded internally over the last few months, they've moved from a position of what might be described as original diffidence to being one of slightly more interested in the outcome. And I think from the National Party's perspective, this gets them off the high horse that they're on over 65, because you can still have a core age of entitlement at 65, but with the choice for some people to take a lesser rate earlier or a higher rate later, you can argue that the policy is not compromised. For the Labour Party, of course, it's the same high horse. They went into the last election at 67, and a number of senior Labour MPs told me that the reaction they got from a lot of their core voters was, thanks very much for telling us we've got to work 2 years longer. Under this, the age of entitlement decision, or the pick-up decision, is made by the individual, not the government. So it's win-win for both, and I think it does get both off their respective high horses.
Have you spoken to Labour about getting support for them?
I have spoken to them. Well, it was under the previous leadership, yes. I'm not sure what the current position might be, but certainly Mr. Shearer had indicated very strong support for it when I spoke with him a few months ago.
The debate about 65 to 67 is one about affordability. This, broadly speaking, from what you've said and first few pages does nothing for affordability.
It's relatively neutral.
So in other words, does it get anyone off the high horse?
Well, I think it
do we
does.
need to do
I think
something
it
about
does.
pension affordability?
I think it does, because if you look at it in the wider context of whether the government moves at some point in the future to make KiwiSaver compulsory, as I wish they would, or not, but the increasing uptake of KiwiSaver, you've got a lot of people who are going to have a much more attractive superannuation package around 65 than they have at the moment. I think with people staying in the workforce longer, there will be people who will opt to defer. Equally, you've got people who will want to come out much earlier. At the moment, they have no choice. They go out under 65 just with their own savings. So it will balance out, but I think that the wider dynamic of much stronger uptake of KiwiSaver will actually change the whole relationship around superannuation. And my point all along has been that just focusing on the age of entitlement has been quite sterile in terms of long-term costings.
So changes to KiwiSaver could mean that you could bring in policy that would make New Zealand super more affordable.
Well, that's possible, but all I'm saying is that these are a number of balls in the air, if you like. This flexible superannuation creates the conditions to give people choice about when they retire. The backdrop is likely to be much more strongly in the future one of most people having a KiwiSaver entitlement, if not everyone, which then increases flexibility on their part. At that point, I think you've got to change game in terms of, can we afford New Zealand superannuation is without change, and can we not?
You say roughly fiscally neutral, but there seems to be a long, fairly substantial list of potential fiscal risks in this discussion document.
There are potential risks, but I think the net effect is you go at 70, I go at 60, we cancel each other out. It's as simple as that. And because it's about personal choice, for every person who chooses to defer to a later age, there'll be someone who will choose to go early.
Second order effects, though, like the impact on tax.
Well, yes, but again, don't forget that there will be a number of people who will choose to take their superannuation early and continue working. They won't necessarily see it as a way out of the system. They might choose it as because of...
Or people who choose not to take the super until later. And,
yeah, that's right, yes.
Lower tax bracket.
Well, they could do that, but we'll catch up with them eventually.
And do you think it's fair for Pacifica and Māori people or other people with lower life expectancy if they are basically taking the money earlier, they're going to die earlier, they're basically getting a small amount of money for the same amount of time?
And the short answer to that is at the moment they get nothing. That's the stark choice. At the moment those people don't have a choice. They have to soldier on until what you might describe as the bitter end. This at least gives them some choice. And if they are, as I said, really in response to your question, if they are lucky enough in the future to have a reasonable KiwiSaver payment to look forward to, then they may well decide I can carry on until I'm 62 or 63, then I can go and I can bridge the gap through till I'm 65. So it does give them more dignity and more option than they have at the moment. And I think that's, you've got to completely look at what the current situation is, which is essentially nothing, and then say this gives people some flexibility and choice. When I spoke originally about 2 years ago with the previous retirement commissioner, her criticism was that it wouldn't be enough. And I said, well, it's actually a lot better than nothing, which is what you've got at the moment. And I think that's the point of contrast, not the fact that it's going to be a lesser amount than you would get at 65. At the moment, it's 65 or nothing.
Are we going to see an increasing divide, though, between blue-collar and white-collar workers, for example?
No, I think what you'll see, actually, is people will actually, for themselves, choose their effective age of retirement. And I suspect what you will see over time is that the age, the real age as opposed to the statutory age would drift up. We don't have a statutory retirement age, but the age of eligibility for superannuation, I think, would drift up through people's choices to probably around 67 or 68 anyway.
Why has it taken this long to get to a discussion document?
Oh, just other priorities. There's nothing sinister in that. It's just that we had other things we wanted to progress ahead of this one.
So the government not want to progress this?
No, it was work began on this earlier this year, and the question really was just getting the resources and the treasury to do it.
So assuming the government did choose to pick up your proposals, how long would it take to implement something like this?
Oh, I would hope that if the government was of a mind to implement something along these lines, we could see some moves as early as next year's budget, but that's dependent on when the timeframes kick in for these decisions.
Could it realistically be in place before the next election?
I think there could be a move towards it before the next election. Whether that's in place is a different question.
So you'd make it a condition of any deal?
Well, if the decision was made on the basis of the public evidence that we wanted to proceed, we would certainly expect that to be carried through and implemented, yes.
Now, the government's given you no decision or indication of when they will make their decision on this, or?
Post-November, there will be a decision made. Now, whether that's immediately post-November or early in the new year, I can't answer. You'd have to ask Mr. English that. But I think the government is taking this seriously. As I say, its interest has noticeably peaked since the debates got underway. And I think it's curious genuinely about what the outcome will be. But I can't really say much more than that.
Bill English is forward. He says National made an undertaking not to change super eligibility. These undertakings are a bottom line for the National League government.
That's correct, and that's...
Isn't he? He's pretty much said no way.
No, I don't
right
think
there.
no, he's not saying that. I think what he's saying is that the age won't shift. The age for full entitlement won't shift
He's saying
below
eligibility.
65. But this is saying that you would... This is offering a possibility. In fact, his statement that is coming very shortly, which I don't have in front of me, is going to indicate that the government is prepared to look at other options.
But this is a change to super eligibility. isn't
Pardon?
it? This is a change to super
Well, it's not.
eligibility.
Well, it's not really, because you would still be eligible for for the full package at 65 if you chose to take the deferred package. Sorry, if you chose to take the reduced package by going early, then you don't sort of kick over at 65 and sort of pick up the full amount. If you've made a decision to uplift your superannuation earlier, but in terms of what you would be entitled to, 65 would remain the base age for calculation, and I think that's really what he's referring to.
Do you think recent events there have reduced your leverage on the government in order to
No, I
advance
don't think
this?
so. I don't think so at all. I think this is still an issue that's got as much potency as it had earlier in the year, and I don't expect recent events to alter that any.
Not so much talking about the issue, but your ability to advance it with the national.
No, I don't think so, because it's something that I've discussed with the Prime Minister on probably 2 or 3 occasions subsequent to those recent events, and I expect that will continue to be on our regular agenda.
Do you think the recent events or recent votes have increased your leverage?
No, I don't really think it's shifted. I think it's about where it was before we started. The important point was to get the document out, to get the public feedback, and then go through a process of determining what action will be taken upon it.
And to what extent do you think people might just take the money early, thinking they can do a better job of managing that money and benefit more than they might do?
Well, they might.
If they just left it till 65 or...
They might, and they might be right, but this doesn't interfere with the process of the Grim Reaper. The Grim Reaper will still strike when the Grim Reaper strikes, so that you can't sort of screw the scrum by saying, we'll get in here earlier and sort of make hay while the sun shines, and I'm not mixing my metaphors horribly. People are still going to die when they die, let's put it that way. So what this is really about is giving people a little bit more flexibility and a little bit more dignity, particularly those who demographically we can say aren't likely to have huge periods of post-retirement life. Now that's a sad but brutal reality. I think we have a responsibility to do what we can to assist them during those times.
So people could take the money early, figuring they can invest it, make a better return, and that's okay?
Well, they could, but then they'd have to work out what the numbers are for them, and that's obviously their matter. As I say, they'd have to think about their own employment situation, presumably their KiwiSaver. They're all part of the mix, but the important point is, and I think this is its most powerful selling point, is that the choice about when one retires and when you pick up your retirement income becomes your choice. It's not the government telling you what your age of retirement will be, which is the effect at the moment of 65 or 67 or some other age.
So people could receive this money and put it into their KiwiSaver account and get the employer and the member tax credit as well?
No, I don't think they could do that, but they could
Why
certainly
couldn't
make
they?
it, because I think...
How would the government know that the money's not coming from
I think
super?
the first part of your question is correct. They could probably put it into an existing KiwiSaver account.
Why couldn't they receive employer contributions?
It would depend.
Tax?
Well, they'd have to be working for a start.
Yeah.
And it would depend, obviously, the point at which they picked it up. But I don't think that's very likely. I don't think
Free money.
I don't think the likelihood is that people will do that. I think most people will want to plan this in terms of what's the best for them in terms of their overall retirement income package.
What's the cost if everyone calls it right? If everyone who is going to die 70 and earlier calls it right? Well, I'm asking you because that's a risk. If people get good information, if people just based on ethnicity, what is the potential cost of them calling this right every time?
I can't give you that figure off the top of my head. This has been predicated in all of the actuarial work that we've seen as part of it has been predicated on it being effectively a neutral cost. But if you're saying that people game the system and get it right 100% of the time, what's the sort of the downstream negative? I can't tell you that figure.
Was there any sort of thoughts of creating a retirement range for like Māori and Pacifica people?
No, because I think that you then start to run into a series of problems of, for a start, of definition, and also in terms of what range you might want to employ. It seemed to us as we looked at it that there was scope, if you went over that 10-year period, 60 to 70, with the midpoint being 65, to say if you let people go either way, either side of that by a relatively even amount, they'll make the choices in the end that best affect them. And for some people, the choice will be made out of necessity rather than the examples you're giving. For others, they will just let it ride at 65. Some may well have a sense of altruism that says, well, I'll wait till I'm 70.
What about increasing the payments for Pacifica Māori people within that range?
No, that wasn't considered as part of this. As I say, this is predicated on the same rate of payment, the base eligibility at 65 remaining, but giving people choice at either end about either deferring or taking it early.
Who do you think should be the next leader of the Labour Party?
I don't have a vote.
Who do you think should be doing the job?
Well, I'm not sure. I think it's interesting how the campaign's unfolding. I would have thought, and I don't want to hex him, but I would have thought that Mr. Cunliffe probably has the best chance. But I think it's very difficult when you've got a three-way electoral college. I think whoever wins is going to face an uphill battle, because it's unlikely that whoever wins is going to carry all three electoral colleges.
Why do you think Mr. Cunliffe has the best chance?
I just think from the point of view of his presence, I think from the demonstrated public support in some of the polling so far, and I think probably in terms of the fact that he has been through it all once before. But the voters of the Labour Party will make that call. But I think whoever takes it on faces that difficult chance of, if you can't win all three houses, how do you actually unite the party?
So is the structure for electing a leader flawed?
I think it is, yes. I think that it's an impossible task to set out to say you're going to satisfy everyone.
Just coming back to this whole thing while we're here, the timing of this whole thing, did the government ever say to you, you vote for GCSB?
No, it was never. This was actually well and trained long before that came along, so it was never raised as an issue.
But they certainly owe you a favour, don't they?
Oh, you may well say that.
What do you say?
I'm just happy to see this policy proceeding, because that's what we agreed to do, and I'm just happy to see it out there, and we'll see what happens.
So when did you decide for a go-ahead date today to launch this thing?
I think actually about 3 weeks ago, but that was really contingent on when the final document was going to be printed. But it was certainly not related to other events. This just took its own track, completely independent of those. What I didn't know, and perhaps that I had known, I would have had a different time, was that Mr. Cunliffe was having a press conference in about 12 minutes' time. Okay, thank you very much.